The American political landscape is rarely calm, but recent weeks have seen a new storm brewing, whispers of martial law. Democrats, led by the ever-vocal James Carville, have been sounding the alarm, claiming President Trump is preparing to declare a national emergency. Their evidence? A recent executive order deploying troops to the southern border. Carville, in his signature folksy style, has painted a picture of a power grab, with Trump using the military to silence dissent and consolidate his authority. He's not alone. Other prominent Democrats have echoed his concerns, warning of a slide into authoritarianism. Social media, never one to let a good conspiracy theory fade away, has amplified these fears, with hashtags like #TrumpCoup's trending for days. The White House, predictably, has dismissed these claims as absurd, accusing the Democrats of fearmongering to score political points. Trump, in a series of characteristically fiery tweets, has called the allegations fake news and accused his opponents of trying to undermine his presidency. So, is this a genuine threat to American democracy, or just another case of political hyperbole? To understand, we need to dig deeper into the executive order at the heart of the controversy. Trump's executive order, issued last month, authorizes the deployment of up to 15,000 troops to the U.S.-Mexico border. The stated purpose: to bolster border security and stem the flow of illegal immigration, a long-standing promise of Trump's presidency. The order has been met with a mix of support and condemnation. Supporters argue that it's a necessary step to address a crisis, pointing to the surge in migrant caravans attempting to cross the border. They argue that the military presence will act as a deterrent, discouraging illegal crossings and allowing Border Patrol agents to focus on apprehending criminals. Critics, however, see the deployment as a dangerous overreach of executive power. They argue that it sets a dangerous precedent, normalizing the use of the military for domestic law enforcement purposes. Some have even drawn parallels to historical instances of martial law, raising fears of a slippery slope towards authoritarianism. To fully assess the situation, it's helpful to look at historical precedents for using the military domestically. The United States has a long history of deploying troops within its own borders, from the Whiskey Rebellion in the 1790s to the Civil Rights era in the 1960s. The use of the military within the United States has always been controversial, with critics often accusing the government of overreach and a disregard for civil liberties. In the case of Trump's border deployment, this debate has been particularly heated, fueled by the already polarized political climate. Those who see the deployment as justified point to the escalating situation at the border, arguing that the government has a responsibility to protect its citizens and enforce its laws. They argue that the military presence is necessary to restore order and deter future illegal crossings. Their opponents, however, counter that the situation at the border does not justify such a drastic measure. They argue that the deployment is a disproportionate response to a humanitarian crisis, one that will only serve to further militarize the border and escalate tensions. The debate boils down to a fundamental question: at what point does a nation's security concerns justify the curtailing of civil liberties? This is a question with no easy answers, one that has been grappled with throughout American history. Meanwhile, on the global stage, another high-stakes game is playing out: the ongoing standoff between the United States and Iran over Tehran's nuclear ambitions. The Trump administration has made containing Iran a cornerstone of its foreign policy, withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal and imposing crippling sanctions on the Islamic Republic. The White House insists that its goal is to force Iran back to the negotiating table, to secure a more comprehensive agreement that addresses not only its nuclear program, but also its ballistic missile program and its support for regional proxies. However, the administration's approach has been met with skepticism from many international observers, who argue that the Trump administration's hardline stance has only served to escalate tensions and increase the risk of conflict. The situation is further complicated by the presence of hawks within the Trump administration, figures like Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who have long advocated for a more confrontational approach towards Iran. Section 5. Talking the talk. The White House pushes diplomacy. Despite the hawkish rhetoric emanating from certain corners of the administration, the White House continues to maintain that its ultimate goal is a peaceful resolution to the standoff with Iran. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, in recent public statements, has emphasized the administration's commitment to diplomacy, stating that the United States is prepared to engage in dialogue with Iran without preconditions. However, these overtures have been met with skepticism from Tehran, which has accused the Trump administration of negotiating in bad faith. Iran has repeatedly stated that it will not return to the negotiating table until the United States lifts its sanctions and rejoins the nuclear deal. The stalemate has left the international community on edge, with many fearing that the situation could spiral out of control, leading to a catastrophic conflict in the Middle East. Section 6. War drums, hawks circle Iran, citing past successes. While the White House publicly advocates for diplomacy, behind closed doors, a very different conversation is taking place. Hardliners within the administration, led by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, are pushing for a more aggressive approach towards Iran, arguing that the time for talk is over. Hegseth, a controversial figure known for his hawkish views, has reportedly been urging the president to consider military action against Iran, arguing that it is the only way to prevent Tehran from acquiring nuclear weapons. He has pointed to the U.S. intervention in the Houthi conflict in Yemen as an example of how decisive military action can achieve strategic objectives. However, Hegseth's assessment of the Yemen conflict has been disputed by many experts, who argue that the U.S. intervention has been a costly failure, both morally and strategically. They point to the devastating humanitarian crisis in Yemen, where millions are on the brink of starvation, as evidence of the human toll of the conflict. The debate within the administration reflects a larger divide within Washington foreign policy circles, one that has persisted for decades. Should the United States prioritize diplomacy or military force in its dealings with adversaries? Section 7. A lone voice. Gabbard challenges the narrative on Iran. Amidst the clamor for confrontation, a lone voice of dissent has emerged from an unlikely source. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. Gabbard, a Democrat and a combat veteran, has been a vocal critic of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, calling for an end to America's regime change wars. In a recent congressional hearing, Gabbard challenged the Trump administration's assertions about Iran's nuclear program, citing intelligence reports that contradict the White House's claims. The intelligence community has been very clear, Gabbard stated, that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon. Gabbard's testimony has sent shockwaves through Washington, challenging the prevailing narrative on Iran and raising uncomfortable questions about the Trump administration's motives. Her willingness to break with her own party and speak truth to power has earned her praise from some quarters, while drawing condemnation from others. Gabbard's stance on Iran is a reminder that dissent is crucial in a functioning democracy, even when it challenges deeply held beliefs. Section 8. Echoes of Iraq. Weapons of mass destruction déjà vu. The escalating tensions with Iran, fueled by accusations of a clandestine nuclear weapons program, have sparked unease among those who remember the lead-up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The ghost of that conflict, with its flawed intelligence and devastating consequences, looms large over the current debate. The Bush administration's claims that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, which proved to be false, have cast a long shadow over the credibility of U.S. intelligence assessments. Critics of the Trump administration's approach towards Iran argue that the current situation bears eerie similarities to the Iraq War, with hawkish voices within the government pushing for military action based on questionable intelligence. The parallels between the two situations serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of groupthink and the importance of skepticism, especially when it comes to matters of war and peace. Section 9. The high stakes of brinkmanship, diplomacy, or disaster. As the United States and Iran engage in a dangerous game of brinkmanship, the world watches with bated breath. The stakes could not be higher. A military conflict between the two countries would have catastrophic consequences, not only for the Middle East, but for the entire world. The path forward is clear diplomacy, not war. The United States must abandon its go-it-alone approach and work with its allies to revive the Iran nuclear deal. Iran, in turn, must demonstrate its commitment to transparency and cooperation with international inspectors. The international community has a vital role to play in diffusing tensions and promoting dialogue. The United Nations in particular must assert its authority and uphold international law, which prohibits the use of force except in self-defense. The future of the Middle East and indeed the world may well depend on it.
So hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and let's turn the page on a new adventure together. Get ready to experience books like never before, only on VBook 360. Like, comment, and share to support the channel and keep the video magic alive. Thank you for stopping by. And remember, every video has a story, and every story deserves to be shared. See you in the next video.